Well, today we're joined by a close friend of President Reagan's, Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. Uh, uh, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for joining us.
Well, happy to be with you, Mark.
Well, you had a very unique and close relationship with President Reagan from all that we are told and we read. Would you tell us your first impressions when you first met him and what your first impressions were?
I first met him when I was leader of the opposition, and he was completing his first term as president. And it was in June of that year. We had a meeting, which with the leader of the opposition is never supposed to be more than a meet and greet. But he asked me to stay for about 40 minutes, and then he invited me to the Rose Garden for a press conference, which for a leader of the opposition from Canada is highly unusual. And he was very supportive of me, and so I figured this is a guy that I'm really going to enjoy. And that day in the meeting, I found him serene, heading into that fall election of his. He appeared to be very confident. He had a surprising knowledge of some of the nuances of Canadian-American foreign relations, which is kind of unusual. So my first impression of him was very positive. He looked in the Oval Office, to me, to be very presidential, but very, very entertaining. We got off right away with some Irish jokes and stories, and it was the beginning of an excellent relationship.
Now, was that at the time to meet with an opposition leader? Was that unusual?
Yes, it was. It was. You know, the president's time is the most precious asset that his staff have for him, and that was unusual, not unprecedented, but very unusual in its the extent and the depth of the interviews and the commentary back and forth. No, it was unusual but very, very helpful to me because I was going into an election about 3-4 weeks later.
Right. So clearly he knew what he was doing. He was trying to give you some visibility. Would it be fair to say?
I think so. I think so. The Liberal Party of Canada, Pierre Trudeau's party, was on a very anti-American tirade at the time.
Right.
And I fought them all every day in the House of Commons on these issues. And I made it very clear. I said, we're a great friend of the Americans and have been, and I always give my friends the benefit of the doubt. And that's what will happen when I'm Prime Minister of Canada. I'm going to stop in Canada this tirade of anti-Americanism, and I'm going to build with the President a brand new relationship where the Americans will be given the benefit of the doubt and Canadian support. And I think all of that, of course, was passed on to him. And he liked that, I think. And so we got on extremely well.
Do you have any knowledge into how his relationship was with Prime Minister Trudeau before you?
Not good. Mr. Trudeau's relationship was, pretty. He had very little respect for Reagan and his intellect, and he made that quite clear. But I think that Reagan in his relationship Reagan was always a gentleman. There was nothing malicious about him, and so I think that he put up with a lot from Trudeau, who had his own qualities and his own political philosophy, which was alien to me and to Reagan, but he was entitled to have that. And but I think the personal relationship was non-existent. As with Mrs. Thatcher, the same thing.
So how would you credit your victory? Obviously, Thatcher came to power before Reagan. There was sort of a conservative sweep, right? I believe in Germany,
Yeah.
West Germany at the time. What, yeah, what, how do you see that sweep of history in terms of ushering in so many conservative leaders at one time or in a period of time? And what was
Yeah.
Canada's role in that?
Well, it was transformational, both in terms of foreign policy. Uh, Under Reagan's leadership, the Cold War was ended in our favor without a shot being fired. That was because of his strong leadership and the solidarity of his allies. We all supported the United States at that crucial moment in world history. And economically, of course, it brought in a wave of privatizations, deregulation, free trade, lower taxes. So it was a revolution, a conservative revolution that took place first in the United Kingdom with Margaret, and then President Reagan, and Helmut Kohl, and myself later. And my first election I won in 1984, landslide election, and that was based on a genuine desire for change, not only in government, but in attitudes about the societies in which we governed.
And what were the summits like that you attended? I know that Prime Minister Trudeau said that he accused Margaret Thatcher of being Reagan's mouthpiece or something like that. But from your perspective, what was it like at the summits, and who was the pushing and the pulling and the tugging, and what was it like?
Well, I thought it was great because there were only 7 of us around the table, with nations representing 63% of the world's GDP. So it had substantial clout. But I enjoyed it all because I felt very privileged to be there in the first place. I think we all were. But secondly, everything took place in the backdrop, with the backdrop of the Cold War. You know, with nuclear missiles pointed at Washington, New York, Paris, London, Bonn, and so on, it made everything ultra important, so as to make progress, but to avoid a nuclear war, nuclear collision. And so, no, I enjoyed it all. Reagan was a delight to be with. There, he came prepared. He was entertaining. He was very polite, and it was a history on the make. That's what it was. And President Reagan, who was a delightful companion in these circumstances, President Reagan was the leader of our crowd, and we all supported him in these objectives with enthusiasm and, as I say, solidarity.
Mm-hmm. I remember as a very, very young man hearing the tear down this wall speech and thinking, well, isn't that nice? You know, that's a nice thought, but it's not going to happen. What was your reaction to that speech?
I thought it was terrific. I thought the way he put it to Gorbachev, who was no slouch himself in public relations and in speaking, I remember it well, and I think that it was a direct challenge to Gorbachev, but not enveloped in hostility. You know, it wasn't shrill. It wasn't accusatory of him personally. But when he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," I mean, it meant an eternity of happiness, possible happiness for the Germans and the Eastern Europeans and so on. This was a big day for America and a huge day for Ronald Reagan.
Hmm. What was he like up close? Was he different from what you imagined before you met him? What were your interactions like?
I got to like him more and more with each meeting, and I had a lot of meetings with him, both on the bilateral side and with the G7, NATO, and so on. I admired him I admired him greatly. And he was a very easy guy to love, you know. He spoke with authority. I always thought, Mark, that he had a sense of communion with the American people. He knew what they wanted, he knew what they expected, and he knew how to conduct himself as President of the United States at all times. I'll tell you, when he entered a room, you didn't have to ask, who's this guy, and has the president arrived? I mean, he took most of the oxygen out of the room in one fell swoop. I enjoyed him enormously. He was, I found that he was kind and respectful, but very strong in affirming America's leadership role, where your national security was involved or important trade decisions to make. He made them, and he stated them clearly, but in a very respectful way. So he didn't irritate the hell out of the Europeans or the Japanese or anybody. He was not an arrogant man at all. He was a humble man in his own way. And that made it very, very easy for countries like Canada, the United Kingdom, and so on, to support him, to come with him along the path, as he used to say, we're going to work our path to happiness.
Mm. And how would you go about contacting him? Would you just pick up the phone, call the White House? What was the protocol?
No, what I would just tell my chief of staff, I'd like to talk to the president today, and he would call the White House and find out when it was convenient for the president. And so the word would come back. The president will be in the Oval Office, ready to take your call at 5:15 tonight. Mm-hmm. So we do that, and the reverse was also true. Mm-hmm. But we spoke many, many times. We had many conversations about anything you can imagine during our years together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So aside from sort of politics and current events, what sort of things would you talk about? Would you talk about personal things?
Yeah, sure. Talk about Nancy and the kids and other politicians. What do you think of him, Brian? What should we do here? What do you think we should do there? We talked baseball. I mean, in my last conversation, he called me. He had retired, of course. This was 1993 when I retired, he called me to wish me well in my retirement. And I said, well, you know, Ron, I'm a political junkie here. How do you think I'm going to get along? He said, oh, I think you're going to do fine. He said, one suggestion I would have is that you and I get together for a radio program. He said, you could be the morning man and I'll do the sports. God. He was a great guy.
Wow. And you obviously were still in office when President Bush took over. And I think even for President Clinton, right? A little bit of Clinton.
Yes, I had 6 or 7 months with Clinton.
Right. So what, just sort of comparing the three of them, what stood out? What made Reagan different from the other presidents that you knew?
That's a difficult question for the following reason, Mark. The three American presidents with whom I worked intimately as Prime Minister of Canada were strongly gifted leaders in different manners, different ways. I enjoyed my association very much with all of them, and they represented the United States extremely well at all times. But if I could probably categorize it, President Reagan was, he epitomized what other people thought the United States was and should be. He conducted himself impeccably at all times, with good humor, lots of laughs and so on, but nothing out of place. Reagan was a stickler for that, and he knew that his personal conduct was a reflection of the presidency that he so valued. And as I say, he was in communion with the American people, and he knew what they wanted and how to conduct himself and so on. That was Reagan. Reagan personified leadership, the word leadership. President Bush, of course, knew foreign policy. He was a great man as well, very brave, courageous guy in the wars, and I enjoyed him very much. But he was much more meticulous in terms of insisting on knowing personally much of the dossier of any country when he dealt with them internationally. Hell, he could tell you the name of the cousin of the king of anywhere. He knew everything. He was well. You know, remember, he had been vice president for 8 years. He had been director of the CIA, ambassador to China, and ambassador to the United Nations. So maybe I could put it this way, that President Reagan's grasp of history as it marched by, and his leadership of it, was the view of someone who took a broad, very broad, and visionary leadership role for America. President Bush was the guy who knew it extremely well, led in many important ways, including the Gulf War, but he was the kind of guy who would get his hands dirty in terms of getting things done. He wanted to make things happen. His conduct, for example, in the Iraq War, his conduct was impeccable. And look how well he did with that. And President Clinton, I thought, was the most gifted young man of his generation in terms of political leadership. I could see when I spent, 7 months with him, I think, and I could see how exceptional he was, and I didn't see any of the warning signs, if there were any. All I saw was a very gifted young American in a leadership role with the right attitudes. Right attitudes, not like things we've seen recently, but with a broad, generous view of America and America's relationship in the world. So I was very privileged to have 3 such outstanding presidents to work with.
And I believe when, of course, one of the insights into Reagan, I think we have it in the film, is that he was able to quit smoking by using jelly beans. I think you also were a smoker when you were young. How did you quit smoking, by the way? What was your secret?
Well, what happened, I didn't quit young enough. And so what happened for me is that I was in the private sector, and I figured after a big night out that I certainly couldn't get involved in politics unless I corrected a few things. So I decided to stop drinking first. And then I was leader of the opposition 2 or 3 years later. And I was, the anti-smoking train had arrived. And I was leader of the opposition, and they'd take my picture every day, put it in the papers of me puffing away at a dinner or meeting with people. And I was in Palm Beach for a little holiday with Mila, and I just decided without saying anything that I'd had enough of the cigarettes, and I stopped with the help of a gum at the time called Nicorette. And so that was another thing that President Reagan, when he came in, he was 70, and his habits were formed, his mind was made up, and he knew what the hell he wanted to do and what he was thinking and talking about. And like, for example, his personal conduct at dinners or social events was the same. It was always flawless. I was amazed at that because, he was raised in a culture in Hollywood that wasn't always easy and didn't lend itself to some of the traditional values. And I felt that he was an inspirational kind of man. I once said to Nancy, after President Reagan's death, I said, you know, Nancy, it must have been nice for the two of you, you know, particularly the president, to come back to Hollywood for your holidays and rests from Washington. And, you know, he could walk down the streets and say to some of his people who weren't helpful to him or his political opponents, well, there you go, look at me now. You know, the hell with you guys, you know, kind of thing. And she said, Brian, he never thought like that at all. That wasn't him. He had no such thoughts. He just put that out of his mind. And when he went back to Hollywood, he saw his old friends. But if there were new friends to see, he saw them too. People who had opposed him very strongly, he'd see them. And be happy to do so. So that's when I concluded after that and many other things that, you know, this was a man bereft of malice. He had a happy outlook. He was pleased with what he had done in life and how life had gone for him. But there was no vanity in it, no vanity at all. In fact, when he gave his last speech, you fellas probably have it, what I remember about it is that he said something to the effect to the American people, well, you know, I'm asked sometimes at the end of 8 years, how do I think we did? And he said, looked at the camera and he said, not bad, not bad. And
yes,
that's quite a line when you think of how monumental his presidency was and how important and vital it was to the welfare of the world.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Now, you came to office at a relatively young age, correct?
Yeah.
Were you 45?
I was 44.
44. So obviously we have you at 44, Ronald Reagan coming to office at 69. What are the advantages and disadvantages, would you say, of being a leader at 44 versus 69, for instance?
I thought that President Reagan had an advantage. I came jumped into political action, you know, at the age of the Kennedys, you know, when there was instant glamour everywhere, and all young people in politics tried to emulate that reality.
Right.
I thought upon reflection as I watched President Reagan through his first term when I was not there, his second term where I was, and after, that Reagan actually came. He was sworn in. He was inaugurated, I think, when he was 70, and he had been a successful governor of the largest state in the Union, with an economy which California would rank as the 5th largest economy in the world. And he lived in tumultuous times then as well, with the campuses ablaze and riots and what have you. And so Reagan arrived at the White House after 8 years of this, years of public speaking on behalf of General Electric, a successful career, not a huge career, but a successful career as an actor, and also as president of the SAG, which gave him a lot of exposure to problems. So I felt that he had an advantage. People would tend to ridicule him, but he had the advantage of his 8 years as governor. So his mind was settled on what did he believe in, what did he stand for. I'll contrast this with the famous question that Roger Mudd asked Teddy Kennedy. Teddy was a great friend of mine as well. But Roger Mudd, when Teddy was announcing that he was going to run against Jimmy Carter, Roger Mudd said, well, what do you plan to do when you're president? What are you going to do? And Teddy was flummoxed by it. And the television repeats of that just killed his campaign on the spot. You ask Reagan that, he would tell you right away, because he had lived through it and he had done it and tried to do it in other ways. He succeeded and failed, but he had all the scars of those battles, and he knew what he was fighting for. And so I thought, in retrospect, he had a tremendous advantage over his opponents, including friends like me.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, you go in when you're in your early 30s, or excuse me, early 40s, you know, you got a lot of learning to do, and you got a lot of living to do to catch up with somebody like President Reagan. So I thought it was an advantage, and I thought it showed in the serenity of his leadership.
Mm-hmm.
You never saw Reagan. I said to Nancy once, you know, I've been looking at old footage. I guess it must have been during the week of the funeral. I said, you know, Nancy, I remember Mila and I went out to see her, and the four of us went to dinner with, Mila and I and Nancy went to dinner with Merv Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at dinner, and I said, you know, during the week or 10 days of the funeral, I saw everything on American television, everything. And what stands out for me as a practicing politician myself was that Reagan on television, he never gave a bad speech, and he never looked out of place. Mm. And if you looked at it, there was nothing hectic about his presentations. Mm. You saw him comfortable. He didn't move the top of his body. He stayed on camera at all times. He spoke elegantly, and there was nothing particularly dramatic about it. He was just a great, great speaker. And he did that without the usual running around and your hair's on fire and your arms are shooting up and down. There was none of that. And so Reagan never took a bad picture. He never gave a bad speech.
Well, if he took a bad picture, we never saw it, right?
That's for sure. That's for sure. And that's amazing, you know, when you think about it.
Right.
How, he was under the watchful eye of the media and the cameras pretty well 24 hours a day.
Yeah. How important was he a factor in forming your views? Did he influence you? I mean, obviously your involvement in politics predates him hitting the scene, but were you aware of him in his gubernatorial years? And what role did he play, if any, in your formation?
I can still remember happening at the time, Reagan's extemporaneous speeches on violence at the campuses, the disorder in California's civil society. And that's why I was so intrigued when people used to say that he would speak from cue cards. Yeah, later on when he was talking policy, he always had prepared speeches, obviously. But I was able to hark back to the days when he did this, you know, extemporaneously in front of the cameras, giving these really powerful speeches about law and order, about decency in California, about the requirement for families to stick together and communities to stick together, and so on. He was one of the contributors to my growth in the political area.
Mm-hmm. But of course, when you came to power in '84, he was already halfway through his term.
That's right, exactly.
Did his sort of views, were your policies influenced in any way, would you say, by observing him?
Yeah, I think so, and Margaret as well, and Helmut Kohl. Reagan used to speak in later years of the conservative leadership of the world, of the Western world, under the leadership, as he would say, of Margaret Thatcher, Helmut Kohl, Brian Mulroney, and the President of the United States called Ronald Reagan. Mm-hmm. And that was true. In some ways, mostly in the bilateral areas, he would refer to the Anglo-Saxon troika of himself, Margaret, and me. We had a lot in common. We were democratic societies. In Canada's case, we had soldiers who had fought together and died together in the defense of liberty and freedom around the world for 150 years. And so we had very much in common. And I was inclined, personally, because of my relationship, to favor him and his approach and his attitudes.
Now, there you mentioned there was a group of you more conservatives, including Japan's prime minister. What was it like, Prime Minister Mitterrand, obviously, or President Mitterrand, I should say,
Yeah.
was he sort of the odd man out? What were those meetings like with him in the mix?
Well, Mitterrand, I liked Mitterrand a lot. We got on well. Canada is a bilingual country, as you know, and as a result, he and I were instrumental in creating the Sommet de la Francophonie, which is like a commonwealth of 50 French-speaking nations around the world. And his bilateral approach to the separatists in Canada appealed to me enormously. So he and I got along well.
Mm-hmm.
And he admired Reagan. And he used to say, "Oui, mais," he called me Brian. "Oui, mais Brian, ton ami Reagan, ton ami." Comment est-ce qu'il va? How's your friend Reagan? And then one day in Brussels, he told me, after a NATO meeting, he said, I'll just say the first part in French and come back. Le président Reagan a la notion de l'État. It meant that Ronald Reagan had the sense of the state about him. That there was a difference between the role of president and the actuality of the presidency. And he admired him because of his quiet and, he used to say, dignified sense of leadership. Now, when he started off, Reagan was viewed as France, and Mitterrand was a socialist, he was viewed in France with horror, as he was depicted by many others around the world. He turned out to be a great peacemaker. But at the beginning, they had a very fraught relationship, and at the end, it was entirely different.
What would you say if there was a weakness of any kind? Did you observe anything in Reagan that you thought might be a weakness?
I thought, no, I did not see when he was president. I did not see a weakness. He had the problems of advancing age, which affected him, I'm going to say, very slightly in the last years of his presidency. And then, of course, it was downhill ever since, after that.
Right.
But no, apart from the fact that he was losing a step here and there, I found no vulnerabilities or weaknesses in his positions at all.
So right around 87, 88, would you say you began to notice a little bit?
I can tell you this, that I made notes for historical purposes of important events. I didn't keep a diary or that, but major events, I could write 50 or 60 pages of what I had heard, seen, and so on.
Right.
In my memoirs, I refer to something I had completely forgotten. And that was, I should look it up in my memoirs to be able to quote it to you, but it's there. I write about a luncheon that we had after a state visit, I think in 1987. And we're having lunch on the Truman balcony, the four of us. And I wrote on my notes, and then I forgot it. I wrote in my notes that for the first time in our conversations, I picked up a reluctance on Ron's part to proceed down a road without deference to Nancy's opinion, who was right there, kind of looking at her and she would say, "Oh, Ron, you were saying such and such," and that was the first time that I noticed some hesitancy or some reluctance to be involved. The only problem that I noticed.
So just a slight hesitancy that you would attribute to old age?
Yeah, because the proof of that was that I had forgotten it. And only when I checked my notes before writing my memoirs, and I called Nancy, and I said, "Here, let me read you what I wrote after our luncheon. But I won't use it in my memoirs. I won't put it in my memoirs if you think it's harmful or inaccurate." She said, "No, Brian, go ahead. That's what was happening."
Well, thanks for your time. I think the last question that I would probably ask you before we wrap it up, I know our time is short, is just what do we, I think maybe what did you learn and what can we learn from, this interesting life that he led?
Oh, I think there's one thing that we all can learn from Reagan, and his understanding of the notion of leadership, what real leadership is, and how it's developed and acquired. Most people say it's innate, and it may very well be, but there are things to learn along the way, and he had learned them very well. I think a study of Reagan's presidency should be dominated by an understanding of the concept of leadership.
And your feeling is leadership is sort of acquired as opposed to something innate, as you said.
Yeah, part of it's probably innate, but it's acquired as well. Part of it's acquired.
It just occurs to me when you say that, Jack Warner was asked one time if Reagan should run for governor, and he said, no, Jimmy Stewart for governor, Ronald Reagan for his best friend. So maybe he wasn't seen as a heavyweight earlier, but you feel like he acquired leadership later in life?
He acquired gravitas and knowledge. And he put all that together with a remarkable capacity to articulate a vision for America, and presto, there he is, a leader.
Well, Prime Minister, thank you for your time today, and we look forward to staying in touch with you. And do let us know if you're on the West Coast. And we know how to reach your office, I assume?
Oh, yes, you do, for sure.
Terrific. Well, thank you again for your time and for being
with us. Thank you, and good luck with the project. Make sure you don't have Danny DeVito playing me.
Will do.
Okay, bye-bye now.